Ready.
Okay, let's just start. Good evening. Peace, salam, and shalom to all our seekers of wisdom and spirituality. On behalf of Bethlehem Centre, Process and Faith, Cobb Institute, and the Interfaith Center of Arkansas, J. McDaniels and Sophia welcome you to the third session of our spirituality and poetry sessions. So last week we talked about the spiritual practices of attention, A for attention, and beauty, and also being present, B for beauty and B for being present from the spiritual alphabet. I also hope that you're enjoying the poetry that I share with you in the classes, and also it is emailed to you right after the sessions along with the class recordings on Friday. So before we start today, and we have 4 spiritual practices that we want to talk about today, and I hope we can finish them in today's session. Jay and I will say a few words about what's happening around us nowadays. There has been, as you all know, there has been so much death and destruction in the last few days. And there comes a moment amidst all of that you start losing hope in spite of all the spiritual work that you're engaged in. Well, I've been at that point many times in the last few days, but then what helps me is poetry and prayer. It refuels my spirit, especially in the moments of intense helplessness that I feel. And in one of those moments, I wrote a short letter to my interfaith community, the community that I have helped build, and the community that is very, very strong and vibrant in Arkansas, that Jay and I both work with. And I sent it to them, and Jay asked me before the class to read that letter to all of you before we start the class. And I believe it is relevant to the spiritual practices that we will be discussing today. So let me read the letter to you all, and I will actually also share it if I can share my screen. Let's see if I can share my screen. And Jay, let me know if you can see it. And right after
got it. We got it, Sophia.
Okay, perfect. So I will share this letter that I wrote, and then Jay will say a few words before we start. Dear friends in faith, like many of you, I am also pained by the terrible violence and the human suffering in Israel and in Gaza. The attacks by Hamas that led to the killing of innocents and taking of their hostages fills me with immense grief. Israel's military response by attacking Gaza and the subsequent blockade is leading to a loss of many more innocent lives in Gaza. I know that many members of our interfaith community have deep and personal ties to Israel and to Palestine, and are experiencing tremendous sorrow and trauma at this time. Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians, all of us are children of Abraham. Every single soul created by the divine is sacred and has a right to life, to freedom, and to live in safety. The crisis in Israel and Palestine is also unfolding here in the US, sometimes leading to bigotry and deadly violence in some recent incidents. I believe that our work at the Interfaith Center is more important now than ever before. We will continue to bring people together by respecting our religious differences and celebrating our commonalities. We will continue to teach interfaith cooperation skills among people of diverse backgrounds. And most importantly, we must show utmost compassion and care to all our brothers and sisters in humanity. Remember, we all are connected with each other through our common commitment to humanity. And this heartbreaking situation is a test of that commitment. How we speak about each other and how we speak to each other, especially in the times of crisis, is very important. I know that expressing compassion for one group, even momentarily, can be felt as a betrayal of the other group. And showing care for the other group is hard emotional work because it requires us to reject the binary which says that we cannot grieve or weep for everyone. But we human beings are very much capable of radical love. We can practice radical empathy for the suffering of all others because of our shared common humanity. And we have been seeing that in our poetical expression as well. Please join me in praying for all the innocent lives that are lost, for everlasting peace in this region which has been suffering for far too long. And let's hold each hurting soul in a place of deep love within our hearts. Let me conclude the statement by reading these words from Maulana Jalaluddin Rumi, who says that in this earth, in this immaculate field, we shall not plant any seeds except for compassion and except for love.
Sophia, I want to personally thank you so much for that letter. And I know that if other people feel the same way, they too want to thank you. And I'm sure there are people here. We need that letter, and we need the witness of that letter. And we need the image of a love that holds each heart in its fold, each hurting heart. That's the image of God that we'll be talking about later tonight, as we talk about compassion. So I'll hold that thought, but just a big thanks to you. And if any of you would like to share that message or read it again, I'm sure Sandy can put a link to that in the chat, and so you'll be able to do that. And with that, I think we'll turn to the course at hand, to what we've been about. And Sophia will get us started.
Surely. Let's Sandy, the letter is on the Facebook, so you can share it from there. So let's get started with the 4 spiritual qualities that we will be talking today. Y for yearning, Z for zest, C for compassion, and F for forgiveness. So in the first session of the class, first half of the class, I'll be talking about Y for yearning and Z for zest. So starting with yearning, which sometimes Jay and I write as L for longing. So I'm so sorry for confusing you all in our last email. L for longing, we wrote it, but if you go to the Spirituality and Practice website, they write it as Y for yearning, but the same thing. Hafiz Shirazi says, I long to open my heart and for my heart to do its part, which talks a little bit about, or gives us a little bit about peek into Hafiz's heart. So yearning or longing is an essential part of our spiritual growth. It is the desire that draws us closer to God, or any purpose or cause that brings meaning to our lives. It grows out of our sense of incompleteness and our deep need for something more than us, needing and wanting something bigger than us. Yearning causes restlessness in our souls and draws out the mystic inside us and encourages us to sense the sacred presence in the world, whether it's among animate objects or inanimate objects or other human beings, and helps us feel one with them. So it's kind of a desire of a growing soul, of a fat soul, as Jay puts it. and it's God's work within us. So those of you who are interested in this spiritual practice of yearning or longing, I highly encourage you to read mystical poetry from all traditions. I am particularly more familiar with and knowledgeable about Islamic mystical poetry, and I'll tell you, Hafiz and Rumi do such an amazing job about talking about yearning for the sacred around us and in all the other creation around us. And reading those poems is just a huge motivator, and it sparks that flame of yearning inside you. So, a few words from Maulana Rumi on yearning. He talks about yearning in his poem called I See My Beauty in You. And I say it to divine. One more thing, actually, before I read it. When I read those poems, you will hear the words like friend, beloved, father, um, innkeeper, housekeeper. These are the different words that Hafiz and Maulana use to refer to the divine or to the godly presence. So when Rumi says, I see my beauty in you, I am talking to divine and to all of you right here. I see my beauty in you. I see my beauty in you, and I become a mirror that cannot close its eyes to your longing. My eyes are wet with yours in the early light. My mind every moment giving births. My mind in every moment is giving births, always conceiving, always in the 9th month, always at the come point. How do I stand this? I become these words, you say. Thousands of poems that rise from you, thousands of songs that come from you, and your face contains them. I'm a fly in your honey, a moth caught in your fame's allure, a baby at the mother's breast. I'm an empty sky stretched out in homage. I have become a mirror that cannot closes its eyes to your beauty. I hope you sensed and felt some of that yearning in Maulana Rumi's words. If we practice the spiritual quality of yearning wholeheartedly, it helps us curate a life which is full of zest, full of zeal, and which is the second letter that I'm going to introduce to you before we go to our teacher, Dr. J. McDaniel. So Z for zest or zeal. Zest means being fully alive, fully aroused in life, in love with life, or tapping into the divine energy that's around us. When Hafiz Shirazi talks about happiness, he says, ever since happiness heard your name, it's been running around in the streets trying to find you. So he talks about the zest that happiness itself experiences. Ever since happiness heard your name, it's been running through the streets trying to find you. So this joyful, lively practice of zeal gives us a new sense or a new love of life. It teaches us how to feel alive, the ability to take pleasure from all the small, tiny things in our life, ready for anything that comes our way, and helps us look at every moment as an opportunity or a gateway to new possibilities. Zeal means living abundantly. It's the essence of a meaningful life. And I was reading on the website Spirituality and Practice today that, which is very true, our world needs more people who are alive. So for Z for zest or zeal, I picked this poem which helps us prioritize or choose joy and laughter over fear and prejudice. It uplifts us, reminds us that zest is a choice that we make in our spiritual journey. So here are the words from Hafiz Shirazi that remind me of this spiritual trait. The name of this poem is To Build a Swing. And Hafiz says, you carry all the ingredients to turn your life into a nightmare. Don't mix them. You carry all the ingredients to turn your life into a nightmare. Don't mix them. Because you have all the genius to build a swing in your backyard for God. That sounds like a hell of a lot more fun. So let's start laughing. Let's start drawing blueprints. Let's gather our talented friends. And I will help you too with my flute and my drums. Hafiz will help you too with his flutes and his drum, and he will sing 1,000 words that you can take in your hands, like golden saws and silver hammers and polished teak wood and strong silk ropes to build a swing in your backyard. Because you carry all the ingredients to turn your existence into joy. Mix them. Mix them. Let's mix them. So, Jay, I give it to you with these two poems, one for zeal and one for yearning. And we are ready for you.
I feel after those two poems, we can just go home. What is left to say? It's really beautiful. Sophia, I was hooked by the second poem with the first line because my mother, who died when she was 101, had zest for life up until the very end. But what zest can mean is different for every life stage. So her body was wearing down, but she could still laugh. And she still thought things were funny. And she could still listen. And she could still love. So there's zest for the age of your life, the zest for the moment. That's a very processed idea. But the image that got Sophia was swings. Because when my mom was a little girl, she had an unhappy childhood. There was tension in her family and a divorce and a lot of sadness. And she would go to the local schoolyard where there was a swing set. And she tells the story of going to that swing set and swinging. And sometimes she'd go with a friend, and the friend could push her. But sometimes she was all by herself. So she had to learn to pump herself. You know, you can be in a swing set and you can pump. You can make yourself swing. And she describes the experience of learning to pump, learning to give yourself to that possibility as one of her earliest spiritual experiences. And when she would get to the height of the arc of swinging, she said, I felt so free. At that point, I felt a kind of lightness, a kind of beauty, almost like you were a bird flying. I felt so free. So she would always say to me, Jay, remember how to pump. Remember in every circumstance of your life. Figure out what is the zest possible in that circumstance and pump. So thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Hafiz. I think my job is to introduce a little process theology in this class, or process philosophy. So I'll add a process comment on yearning and zest. And I simply want to name 3 places where we see yearning in life. And in process philosophy, we see it in the natural world. We see it in plants. We see it in animals. We see it in molecules. We see it in atoms. There's something like yearning, something like desire, wherever there is energy. Where there is energy, there's a desire for something. Survival, happiness, novelty. So Whitehead, or process philosophy, offers what you might call a cosmology of yearning. There's yearning everywhere. And we in human life, we partake of that too. And we have our own unique forms of yearning, as do other creatures. But our yearnings in process philosophy include a yearning for peace, for some kind of harmony, some kind of security, safety. And they include a yearning for connection, friendship, family, community. We want to be with others and enjoy their presence, and they enjoy ours. And there's also a yearning for novelty, for newness, for adventure. I want to think new ideas. I want to see new places. I want to explore. So yearning for security, for peace, yearning for connection, yearning for novelty, for newness, are 3 forms of yearning we find in human life from a process perspective. And then I'd like to mention divine yearning. Now, there are many ways to understand God or the divine, and I certainly don't want to push any single way on anybody here, but I do want you to know a little bit about the process understanding of God. I mentioned earlier, last time, in process thought, God is kind of like the mind of the universe, or the soul of the universe. The whole universe is carried within the mind of God, like an embryo is inside a womb, or fish are inside an ocean. And it's possible to think of that ocean, that embryo, the womb of the universe, God, as always complete, always satisfied, needing nothing. But in process philosophy, it's really not the case. The soul of the universe, God, needs us and yearns for rich connections with us, and yearns for a kind of harmony, an intimacy, a love that we can give back. And this divine yearning is also inside us. So when we yearn for peace, when we yearn for richness of connection, when we yearn for healthy adventure, for newness, for novelty, we are experiencing God's yearning inside us. And so that gives rise to one final point. One of the beauties of the Islamic tradition, but also in Christian mysticism and also in Jewish mysticism, is the image of God as beloved. Not simply God as king, or God as Lord, or God as parent in the Christian tradition, but God as beloved. We are to God as someone is to a lover. And the lover seeks you, and you seek that lover. Now that image is everywhere in Rumi. But it's also true to a process perspective, because that deep yearning, yearns for us too. And that yearning, if ever you yearn like that, you know that with yearning comes pain. Because there's loss. Your life is connected with others. And so there's pain in God. There's suffering in God. There's longing in God. And we can only imagine what that longing must feel like today, with all the suffering on all sides, to which Sophia's letter points. Well, what are we yearning for? Well, I like the word zest. We're yearning for the fullness of life. Who isn't? Who isn't? All right, that's our process. That's my process commentary on the poem, Sophia, and a little process thought. Now, does anybody, we've got a couple of minutes and then we'll shift to compassion and forgiveness. Anybody have any thoughts or comments or questions that you would like to raise in the time that we have? Or Sophia, would you like to say anything?
If I may ask a quick question, Jay.
Sure.
How do you view balancing like aspiring and like yearning and zest and all of these kind of like aspirational kind of energetic virtues with gratitude? How do you balance those two?
Well, Michael, with difficulty.
Yeah. Same here.
And sometimes quite unsuccessfully. But I think gratitude, at the very least, is gratitude for what is. And despite the tragedy, there's also the beauty of the world as it is, people as they are. And that beauty does not have to include, it doesn't always have to be happy, but it's connected. So I think to feel gratitude for what is and openness to what can be, those are the two that are to be held together. Gratitude for what is and openness to what can be. I think we can do both.
Yeah.
I really think we can.
Yeah.
I actually think God does them. I see the very soul of the universe as grateful for the beauty of what is, but also luring us into what can be. Whitehead struggled with peace. Whitehead's highest virtue was peace, but he opposed peace as mere anesthesia, a cutting off of feeling. He said peace also includes adventure. It also includes openness to newness. All right, Michael. That's the best I can do.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Sophia.
Okay, Jay, let's switch gears to our next two letters, and let me introduce how spirituality and practice defines them and give a poem each on them. So we are going to talk briefly about C for compassion. And if those of you who are following the website, you will see that C for compassion is defined as a feeling and also as an action, both. At the spirituality and practice website, they call compassion, which is a feeling, deep within ourselves, just like a gentle quivering of heart, but also a way of acting. How acting? We being affected by the suffering of others, and then we moving on their behalf. And the examples which are given are the examples of Buddha and Jesus, who are one of the most well-known exemplars of compassion. So compassion is not only a very foundational ethical value in Christianity and Buddhism, but it's also one of the key values in all the major faith traditions. It's likened to opening of the heart, because first we have to allow ourselves to feel the suffering that's going on in the world, including our own suffering. And compassion demands that we don't turn away from the pain. In fact, we move towards it with care. And we go into situations where people are hurting and include them in our circle of compassion. And after including the people, also expand our circle of compassion to other creatures, to nature, to the inanimate world around us. I believe the quality of the spiritual practice of compassion is built on empathy and love, both of them. And it requires us to practice both of them in order to have compassion, especially when we are practicing compassion for those whom we don't love or who are not close to us. So compassion not only for our friends or people that we like, but also compassion for our foes and the people we don't like. That's what Jesus called loving your enemy. I want to highlight that some people, because it includes me, find that the experience and practice of compassion as a spiritual discipline is directly effective towards the transformation of heart. And that's important for Sufis and for mystics like Rumi and Hafiz and many more Muslim mystics, because our goal is the transformation of heart. And oftentimes we'll experience that compassion is a stronger tool to bring about that transformation than prayer. Well, that doesn't mean that prayer doesn't help or prayer doesn't play a role. It does. It gives me peace, it gives me comfort, it gives me solace. But the opening of the heart lies through my deeds of compassion for others, not through my prayers. And that's, I think, a very, very important role of compassion in my life. So I bring to you a poem again from Hafiz Shirazi for compassion that I use very regularly in my life as a prayer, as a tool to open my heart, especially when I am in a difficult situation with my loved ones, with my friends or relatives, and I'm in a tough situation and I have anger or resentment or just angry at somebody. I read this poem, I send this poem to the loved one that I'm upset at, and it helps me open my heart. So it's a very, very common poem and prayer in my life. I don't know the name of the poem. I always call it Beautiful Creature. The poem also actually helps us find the beauty in our foes and enemies. So Hafiz Shirazi goes, he says, there is a beautiful creature living in a hole you have dug. There is a beautiful creature living deep inside in a hole that you have dug. So at night, I set fruits and grains, breads and sweets, and little pots of wine and milk beside your soft earthen mounds. And I sing. I often sing to you, dear child. But still, dear one, you do not come out. I sing and I often sing to you, God's child, but still, dear one, you do not come out of that hole that you have dug deep inside you. let me tell you that I have fallen in love with someone who hides in you, deep inside you. We should talk about this problem, or else I will never leave you alone. So this poem by Hafiz really, really helps me in my spiritual practice of compassion, and I hope it will help you too. So moving on to the next letter, F for forgiveness, which is a much harder practice than compassion. Much harder to talk about, let alone practice it. But it's really important to know that all the spiritual traditions that I have studied, are the people that I've met, religious people, everybody raises up the value of forgiveness. It is quite an impossible ideal for sometimes, but remember, 2/3 of the Jesus's teachings were about forgiveness, and a good third of Jesus's parables is about forgiveness. And forgiveness is important because it's a very human phenomena. It has got nothing to do with logic. It's got something to do with the heart. It's the breakdown of logic, actually. Forgiveness is a recognition, it's a mystical recognition that all of us make mistakes. We're human. Every human makes mistakes. And we're all trapped in those wrongdoings or evil, and we're suffering from it because we're human. But the most powerful human experience is to give or receive forgiveness. So when we forgive, we choose the goodness of the other over their faults. And when we do that, we experience God's goodness flowing through us. And we also experience our own goodness, especially when we give forgiveness. We experience our goodness in a way that surprises us. So in this text that we are using, Spirituality and Practice, they mention 3 different kinds of forgiveness. They talk about self-forgiveness, which enables us to release our guilt and perfectionism by forgiving our own selves. They talk about the forgiveness that we extend to others that I just talked about, how we give others forgiveness and how we receive forgiveness from them, from friends and foes alike. And the third kind of forgiveness that they talk about is the forgiveness of God that assures us of our own self-worth and strengthens us actually to give more forgiveness. So before I give you this poem on forgiveness, I want to share this very compassionate practice of forgiveness from a tribe in South Africa. And those of you who want to read more about it, go to the Spirituality and Practice website. So in a small tribe in South Africa, when somebody acts irresponsibly or unjustly, they are placed in the center of the village, alone and unfettered. And all work ceases. Every man, woman, and child in the village gathers in a large circle around that accused individual. And then each person in the tribe speaks to that accused person one at a time. Each person recalling the good things in that accused person who's in the center of the circle and who has made that mistake. Every incident, every experience that can be recalled with any detail, with any accuracy, is recounted. All his or her positive attributes, good deeds, strengths, kindness, they are recited carefully and at length. This tribal ceremony sometimes lasts for days. And at the end, that whole tribal circle is broken, a joyous celebration takes place, and the person is symbolically and literally welcomed back into the tribe. I just love this tribal practice. And I thought I'll share it with you before I give you the poem about forgiveness. And this poem today is again from Hafiz Shirazi. So we did a lot of Hafiz today. And the poem is called Forgiveness is Cash. So Hafiz says, forgiveness is cash. Forgiveness is the only cash that you need. All other kinds of silver and gold and diamonds and jewels really just buy strange things. Forgiveness is the only cash that you need. It's the part of the real treasure that you're looking for to craft your falcon wings and return to the divine freedom. Forgiveness is the only cash you need. So, Jay, these were my two poems for compassion and forgiveness today, and a bit of introduction from spirituality and practice.
Sophia, I think that what you offered in those poems and your comments is really wiser than anything I have to say, but I'll say it anyway. But that's my feeling, because my job is to talk about process thought in relation to all this. I want to talk. I want to
remind you that you have a very generous heart, and we'll talk more about it in G for gratitude and generosity. And it shows every time I say a poem, your generosity of soul comes out. So thank you for that generosity of compliment.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So go ahead, we're listening. I'm really excited to hear more about process theology around compassion and forgiveness.
A unique feature of process theology is that it says that literally, not just figuratively, literally, we can feel the feelings of others. And all living beings, all people, we are bundles of feelings. In process theology, even our thinking is a form of feeling. We feel the presence of ideas. Our fears are forms of feeling. We fear things that frighten us. We feel things that frighten us. Everything is feeling, everything. Even mathematicizing is a form of feeling in process thought. So the question is, can we feel the feelings of others? And process thought thinks we can. And so you know this a little bit. You know, when somebody comes into the room and they're sad, you can kind of feel their mood. Or they're angry, you can feel their mood. Or they're happy, you can feel their mood. And when people talk, the tone of voice reveals a little something of the mood. So the idea of feeling the feelings is not that strange. But in process thought, love includes and needs empathy, a capacity to feel the feelings of others. And so the philosopher that so influenced process thought, Alfred North Whitehead, one of his descriptions of God was that God is, in his words, a fellow sufferer who understands. So this vast mystery in which we live and move and have our being, strangely enough, wonderfully enough, is a fellow sufferer who understands. And what that means is that even that mystery, even God, feels our feelings and feels the feelings of everything all the time and is affected by those feelings. But Whitehead said a fellow sufferer who understands. And so, you know, I can feel your feelings. I can feel your anger, but not understand. And so to understand is to know the context. in which you feel what you're feeling, the larger context, the circumstances of your life, and to know the decisions you've made. That too is part of the context. So this means that God is a deep companion to the question, is the universe friendly or not? Process thought says there is a deep friend. The mystery at the heart of the universe is a deep friend. Now, we look for images to imagine that, and many Christians take the image of a parent, a mother, a father. Jesus' own word for God seems to have been Abba, which literally meant daddy. I don't think those images are not so critical. People have different images. But if you take the image of a parent, just play with it for a little bit, and you think of this mystery as on the analogy of a parent. If you're a parent, have you ever been angry with your children? Have you ever experienced something that your children did to one another or to themselves that hurt them and hurt you so much that you felt something like anger? The biblical traditions are filled with images of a God that so loves Israel, so loves the world, that this God feels something like anger. And there's a great Jewish writer, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was brilliant, and he knew that many people might want to reject all those images of anger. We just want God as love. We want God as tender. God as nice, but we don't want any of that anger stuff. And Heschel said, watch out, because anger is the flip side of pain. And when you talk about God's anger, that's a metaphoric way of saying God is in deep pain. That's how you can understand that. And Islam, too, has images of wrath as well as mercy. How to understand wrath? Is it just vengeance? Is it just mean-spiritedness? Is it just an impulse to control? Well, process thought says, try pain. Try pain. That's what's going on in the divine heart when we do what we do to one another. It's not vanity on God's part, it's pain. Another feature of process thought, are you still following me a little bit here? A lot of times with compassion, our first instinct is to think about sharing in the suffering of someone else. And of course, that's really important. But equally important in the process tradition is sharing in the joy and understanding and feeling the joy that others feel, and of course yourself. So if you're alienated from somebody or you just don't know somebody, if you say, tell me, what kind of music do you like? Tell me about your family. What do you like to read? Do you have a hobby? What have you seen that you'd like to share? You're asking them about their joy. You're asking them about where they have found zest. And that is by all means as important to love as the suffering. It frees people. They do feel honored. They are recognized. Tell me about your mother. Tell me about your grandmother. I want to hear. Tell me. That's an act of love too, and that's shared joy, and that's really, really important. So compassion is shared joy and shared suffering, and that's true of the Holy One. That's true of the deepness of the deep. She too, he too, it too. shares in the joy. So think of a little, like I think I told you last time, I'm a new grandfather, and a very obnoxious one at that. So you're lucky that I'm not just telling you grandchildren's stories. But, you know, when you watch a young child play, there's just joy. That too is felt by God. That too is loved by God. That too enriches God. God could not be God without the joy. Now, forgiveness, that's a real tough one. And this is where, Sophia, I really think the things that you said are truly wiser than what I have to say. But I will quote one process thinker whom I admire. Her name she's perished now, she's with us, Marjorie Suhaki, Japanese sounding name. She did an extensive study of forgiveness and really asked the question, what is it? How does it work? And she gave me an idea that you might find helpful. Marjorie was particularly interested in the question of can people who have been abused, what does it mean for them to forgive? And she did not want to romanticize it, sentimentalize it, or even say they always have to. Who can say? Who can say? But what she concluded was that if you forgive somebody, it's not that you like them. It's certainly not that you approve of them. You may even hate them. But nonetheless, you will their well-being. May even you be happy. And that little act of the will is a shift away from vengeance to love. May even you be happy. And when you can shift away from resentment to love, it's deeply freeing. It's not just that they're freed, you're freed. Because resentment, vengeance, is such a poison. It can really poison a soul. So the art of forgiveness. At our house, my wife, Kathy, has started praying the Buddhist loving kindness prayer. And you lift up somebody in your mind's eye. First you do yourself. First you do yourself. And then you do someone you like. And then you do someone that you ignore. And then you do someone that you detest. And you lift them up and you say, may you be happy. May you find freedom. May you find peace. May you feel safe. And Kathy's discovered, and I too, when I do it, it really has a psychological effect on you. By the way, we would lift up political figures with whom we sharply disagreed. So I won't mention any names, but you can kind of half imagine what that might be like. So anyway, those are my thoughts on forgiveness. May there be more of it. So that's it for me. We have about 5 minutes. Anybody have a comment? Or Sophia, would you like to respond in any way to anything I just said?
Well, Barbara had, firstly, I loved how you introduced compassion, not only sharing and connecting in suffering, but also sharing and connecting in joy. I never looked at compassion like that, so that's really helpful. Marjorie actually commented also on Barbara, sorry, on Marjorie
Barbara.
Suhoki, and talked about the definition of forgiveness that you gave, to will the well-being of the offender without minimizing the offense.
Yes, yes.
And I think that is extremely important. I think about it a lot, that forgiving somebody or even holding empathy for others who have wronged you or abused you or have been violent towards you does not mean that we are giving them a pass or ignoring their actions or minimizing their actions or forsaking their actions. Um, Forgiveness is actually for ourselves, to let ourselves free, not for others. But with that, let's just actually quickly go to our questions or comments. So I think, let's see, who do we have here? Carlton, yes.
Hi, can you hear me? Is my mic working all right?
Yeah, we can see you and we
Yes.
can hear you.
Excellent. A wonderful talk. Let me start there. And unfortunately, it brought up maybe about 8 or 10 questions, which I know there's no time for. But I just want to mention a couple, I think. Sophia, you talked about connecting empathy and love as sort of the root source of compassion. I think that sometimes, I mean, I think that's true, but I think sometimes we forget that there is another side to compassion, that there are people in the world who either have difficulty or are unable to be empathetic, and there are people who clearly don't love other people, or is maybe not just a person in particular. But I think that a lot of times people may do things for very self-centered reasons, very maybe egotistical or narcissistic reasons, but that doesn't mean that their actions are not compassionate, because compassion, I think, has to be viewed from the perspective of the recipient, not the giver. So if you do something that makes my life better in some way, I think in general, I receive that as compassion, even if your motives were not pure or not even close to pure. It almost becomes irrelevant. It's what you did that I think is what I would call compassion. That was just one thought. The other thought was on forgiveness, and that's where all the other questions came in. But and I agree with what you said, Sophia. Forgiveness is the more difficult of the two to discuss, just because it's many faceted. But I tend to think, I agree, Jay, with what you said a little bit, at least from myself. I feel no obligation to forgive everyone who's wronged me. I feel an obligation to forgive those who I guess are in one of two categories. One is the person who offends me innocently. That was not their intent, or they did not know, or they made a mistake. There was no intent to harm. And forgiveness, I think, at least for me, comes fairly easily to that person. The other one is maybe the person who did intend harm at the time, but who has since changed their mind or their understanding, or there's a regret there for what they did. But I tend to think of forgiveness almost more like a bank would. Well, bank's probably a bad example, right? But almost like a bank forgiving a loan or a debt. I think when someone wrongs you and they later regret it, I think it creates this implicit debt that they feel to right that wrong and to do something to correct it. And at least for me, forgiveness is an absolution of that debt. It's saying you don't need to do that. You don't need to bend over backward now to make it right. I'm just willing to call it even. And it's a little bit more like that. The question that I know we don't have time to discuss, but I'll just mention it, I guess. And I don't remember which one of you mentioned it. Somebody said that God's forgiveness toward us raises or enhances our sense of self-worth. And maybe after a meeting or maybe some other time, I look at that as at least for me, I feel it's exactly the opposite. But we can't do that in 2 minutes, but I did want to mention that anyway. But a great talk from both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I don't think we have time to sort through all those things, but those are really excellent points and questions. And I think, Carlton, I struggle with the question, is forgiveness always appropriate? I just struggle. I don't know. I don't want to put myself inside the situation of someone for whom it comes with terrible difficulty. I don't want to say you should. I just struggle with that. Anyway, Sophia, are there any other comments we need to respond to, or you would like to?
There are very good questions brought out by Carlton that we can definitely address later on. I would say one thing, that in my own personal spiritual practice, for me, compassion and forgiveness are more intentional from me and not much to do with the recipient, more to do with my own spirituality. But having said that, before I close, and we're at time, there are a few comments. Do you want to take any one of them, Jay?
Well, let's see. I see the mention of restorative justice, and
Yeah.
I think thank you so much for bringing that up. Just excellent point.
There are quite a few very good comments, but since I'm going to save them, and Jay, if you want to address any one of them in our next session, I think that would be wonderful, because we're out of time and I want to give everyone this poem before we close. So let's close with another poem, just the way we started, as we grapple with how this crisis is unfolding in different parts of the world. It's also unfolding in our own country here in US, and it's leading to sometimes fear and prejudice, bigotry, and also violence among people who have known each other for a long time, people who have been friends, are sensing fear with each other. So I thought I would end on a poem which is focused more on fear and touches the topics of forgiveness and compassion as well. So this is also from Hafiz Shirazi. So today was more a Hafiz day. So this is our closing poem. And the name of the poem is Fear is the Cheapest Room in the House. I hope that's the name. That's just the first line. So fear is the cheapest room in the house. So Hafiz says in this poem, fear is the cheapest room in the house, but I would like to see you living in better conditions. Because your mother and my mother were friends. I know the innkeeper in this part of the world. So why don't you get some rest tonight and come to my house tomorrow? We'll go and speak to the beloved together. I do not make any promises right now, but I know that if you pray, then somewhere in this world, something good will happen, because beloved wants to see more love and more playfulness in your eyes. For that is our greatest witness to beloved. Your soul and my soul once sat together in beloved's womb, playing footsie. Your soul and my soul once sat together in beloved's womb, playing footsie. Your heart and my heart are very, very old friends. That's Hafiz's words to remind us our deeper, deeper connection of hearts and souls, and not to give in to fear. So I leave you all and remind you to spark the yearning in your soul, be alive and live with zest, practice compassion with your friends and foe, seek and give forgiveness till we meet again next week. Peace, salam, and shalom to all of you.